Just to make sure you're in the right place, this is a live recording of the Chalk and Gavel podcast. And you're all going to be on it because you're talking.
We're coming back together in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Awesome.
Chalk and Gavel is for educational purposes only. While Chris and Jamie always try to provide accurate information, the law is like what I'm willing to eat. It's always changing. This podcast is not legal advice and does not create an attorney-client relationship, but they promised me it would be a lot of fun. For you. Can I get my candy now?
The kids are alright. The kids are alright. The kids are alright.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to a very special live edition of Chalk and Gavel. We're recording here at the Education Law Association's 2025 conference in Kansas City. And I had a joke written there that I didn't even finish. Like, it's just got a bunch of question marks. So I didn't even come up with a punchline. So we're already off to a fantastic start. I'm Jamie Cudlitz. I am only one half of your usual hosting team. Chris had a conflict that unfortunately prevented him from making the trip this time. He sends his regards, and he has provided us with pre-authorization in writing, of course, to poke fun at him while he is not able to be here to defend himself. But I didn't want to do this on my own due to a very long history of insecurities, but that's for another podcast. So I've recruited a brilliant expert and a big fan of the show to play the role of Chris. Well, she's not playing the role of, she's playing the role of Dr. Janet Decker because...
I wish I was playing the role of Chris.
Janet is a fan of the show. She's been a huge supporter, professor at IU, just a huge advocate for increasing educators' legal literacy, and we are thrilled to have Janet on the show. Thank you so much for joining me and making me look and sound so much better than I am. So thank you for coming, Janet.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate it.
Long-time listener.
Thank you. So we're going to change up our usual format and dive into answering some listener questions. So we've been doing this thing for over 2 years now. We have 56 episodes, and we have built up a decent listener base, I guess. And we're starting to get feedback from a lot of our listeners, and they've had a lot of questions. And so we decided to just do an episode today on answering listeners' questions. And a lot of those listeners actually come from Janet's courses that she teaches at the undergraduate level, which is, as many of us know, is very rare to have education law covered at the undergraduate level. And so we know that a lot of our listeners are teachers. We know a lot of our listeners are folks in teacher preparation programs, so not yet teachers. And so, that's, Chris and I love that because, we know that we're helping to provide them with information that they don't normally get in their teacher preparation programs. So we are very, very happy today to be answering a lot of their questions. And we were really thrilled to kind of hear what's on their minds. And so hopefully we can help dispel some rumors and answer some questions. So that's what we're going to do today. I also have a few recordings of Chris. So even though he's not here, he's here in spirit, and he's also here on that big screen. So he will answer some of the questions that the listeners have sent in so that you don't have to just listen to the two of us the whole time. So, and we don't want him to feel left out. So anyway, that's the plan. And what else? Oh, we organized a lot of those questions into different buckets, 4 different buckets. Questions about the show, education law advice, emerging issues in school law, and my favorite, all these questions that fell into a bucket that we just call the silly stuff. So are you ready to get started? And the louder you cheer and say things, then the mics will pick it up, and then you'll be on the show too. So are you ready? Thank you. Excellent. Okay, Janet, you want to kick things off for us?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thanks, Jamie.
Yeah.
I have these amazing students like Jamie talked about, and they love the show. So a lot of the questions come from them. And when I told them that some of their questions were going to be on the podcast, they were really excited. So I'm excited for them. I teach graduate law and undergraduate students at Indiana University, but most recently I've been primarily teaching undergraduate students. And in this undergrad class, I think it might be the only, or at least one of the only required school law courses for future teachers. And so if any of the listeners know of other courses that are required in teacher preparation programs, I'd love to know about it. I think it's a really important thing to require for our pre-service teachers. But this class is a favorite for our future teachers, and as all of you in the room know, it's interesting stuff we talk about, right? Like how exciting is it when we get to the part where we're talking about bong hits for Jesus, and they all look at me like, did you really say that? But I have noticed in recent semesters that it's more challenging to motivate my students to read the textbook, and that makes sense, right? Like young people these days, and I guess when I say young people these days, that's really aging me. I sound like a complete codger saying that.
Well, then you fit right in on this show because we complain about how old we are all the time.
Yeah, and if I use the word codger, I probably am a codger. But anyway, young people these days, and really most of us, we enjoy listening instead of, or maybe in addition to reading, right? And so we like being entertained, we like to hear conversations and stories, and we love the convenience of listening to a podcast or watching videos on our phones. So mostly I appreciate multitasking when I listen to the podcast. But back to your question, so I knew that students would love Chalk and Gavel. So it was about a year ago, I began assigning the podcast in the undergrad class. And it has about 80 students in it. And every semester since, the students just rave about the show. They really enjoy Jamie and Chris, and they even tolerate and sometimes laugh at your dad jokes.
Good, because my kids don't. So
Somebody's got it.
Glad somebody is.
So they like it so much that now this semester I've been assigning an episode pretty much every week because you have so much fantastic content. And so it corresponds with the most important things that educators need to know about the law, and it's really relevant and interesting. And so my students now, they're super fans, and they have all kinds of questions for you. So I'm going to get started.
Okay.
Here's a funny question for you to answer. Reagan Angles asked, what made you want to leave education and start Chalk and Gavel?
Oh, Reagan. Reagan.
Because you're making the big bucks, right?
Yes, this show is raking it in. We're losing quite a bit. No, we did not leave education to do this. That I don't know how well my wife would feel about that, given how much money the show is making. No, we are still education professors, and we did not leave education. This is just kind of a side gig. And we spend, I don't know, between 10 and 20 hours or so every couple of weeks putting these episodes together because Chris and I met at ELA, at this education law conference a few years ago, about 3 years ago, and we just started talking over a meal. We had never met each other before. We just happened to be eating breakfast one day together, and we realized we really love this content, right? Like it's really fun, it's really interesting content. We started sharing stories about how our own students in our graduate level courses responded to how they responded to this content. They would come in feeling really insecure, really intimidated by education law, and then they would leave saying, wow, this is, these stories are so interesting, they're so compelling. And we realized we had a lot of that in common. We ended up hanging out, and we realized we had a lot of other things in common. And then he just turned to me one day and he just said, I've always wanted to start a podcast, and I had not. And he said, he begged me, like he got down on one. No, he didn't. I said, that could be pretty cool, because we were really invested in trying to increase educators' legal literacy, and so we thought that this would be a great way to provide a free resource and get this stuff out there and try to make it as accessible as we possibly could, because people are coming at this material, they're very intimidated by it, and educators have very little exposure to it, even administrators. They only get one class, and then that's it, and it's stuff that affects their daily lives. So, but that's all I will say about that. I will let Chris answer part of that question, and let's hear what Chris has to say.
Hi, everyone. I'm Chris Thomas. I'm the other hosting half of Chalk and Gavel. I'm so disappointed I can't be there with you all. I had a scheduling conflict that I couldn't get out of, so I'm very, 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 very sad not to be there with all of you. Side note, I did not give Jamie permission to poke fun at me, so I hope you all will hold him accountable to that. But the question about why did we decide to start Chalk and Gavel, I have been thinking about starting Chalk and Gavel since I was in law school. So I started law school in 2013, and always knew that education law was kind of where I was going. I was a former teacher, was doing a PhD in education policy. And so since then, I've always kind of just loved podcasts and, knew that it would be a lot of fun. And I figured, how hard could it be? Turns out kind of hard, as we learned through the learning process of starting our show. But the real motivation for Chalk and Gavel was really just kind of being a teacher, being a school attorney, and seeing how much educators kind of struggled with the law. In a lot of ways, it was this kind of mysterious force that was working in the background that no one really understood, or it told them what to do, but no one really understood why or where those requirements came from. And there's just a lot of concern and just general apprehension about the law. And being a law student and then being an attorney, the law was something that I kind of also fell in love with in an interesting way, where I don't know, it's something where it's not poetic, because I don't want to go that far, but there's something to be said about trying to create a body of rules and principles that are universally applicable, that help us order our society and decide what kind of society we want to live in. And I think education is such a fascinating part of that whole picture. And so really, I can't imagine doing anything else, and I can't imagine sharing this all in any other way.
I like Chris's lobster shirt too, just so make sure everybody's. He's
didn't even
officially
notice.
very Florida. He had a lobster shirt on. He looked very, very Florida. All right, I haven't seen him for a while, so that was good. So another listener asked, how do you pick which cases or guests to have on the show?
Well, lately, it hasn't been very hard, because as many of you know, it's like drinking from a fire hose lately. We try to, we've done about 56 episodes so far. We try to do a balance of topics, and so we don't want to, do 5 episodes in a row on student speech issues and things like that. So we try to do a balance there. We try to do a balance between some of the foundational cases and a lot of the current cases that are coming across. And so we just, sometimes we have like 10 episodes planned. Like we've figured out, okay, we want to cover these 10 cases, and so here are the next 10 episodes. And other times it's been, Chris calling me and saying, okay, we have an episode coming out next week and we don't have anything planned. What do you want to do? And so it's kind of a mix of both. And through ELA, we've managed to, we did a couple episodes on the Kennedy case, and we met Richard Katsky here through ELA, and Richard came on, and was a great guest. And the feedback that we got from the listeners was how cool it was to hear from the actual attorney who argued the case and provide that level of insight. And we've had Janet on the show before talking about helping us talk about special ed stuff. And we had Martha McCarthy come on when we covered the Oklahoma case at the Supreme Court this past season. So Martha came on the show and helped us break that down. Richard came back to help us talk about the Mahmoud case. So, a lot of the guests come from our connections here at ELA, but, ultimately we've got some kind of big plans from where we would like this show to go, and we would love to be able to start covering cases and pulling in folks who were involved in those cases to really help dig into the detail and the nuance, because most of the time we're just operating from what we get in the opinion and then what we can sort of pull from the news and verify there. So that's kind of how we pick it. Yeah.
Cool. One thing I really appreciated, it seems like you're highlighting some of the main cases that we think are most important for educators to know about. So that's been really helpful to see those big ones covered.
Yeah. We had, I can't believe I didn't mention this, but we had our 50th episode. We brought Mary Beth Tinker on, and she talked about her case, and she talked about her life as an advocate for students and children. And that was an amazing conversation. We like to cover all the big ones. You can assign bong hits for Jesus now. That was a fun one. That was our first year anniversary show, and our second year anniversary show we did that came out a few weeks ago. We did the Bethel versus Frazier case, and that was a fun speech to read. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's how we pick them. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah, there's not much of a science to it, or an art really. We just
I think about all that free content though, like so much of that is like the crux of an education law class, and you're providing it. It's really great.
We're not trying to take your jobs away, we promise. We can't do this as well as most of you can, but we're just trying to do our little piece.
Good.
Yeah.
So I have another listener question. Caroline Knight asked, "What is your walkout song?" That's the show's theme song.
The theme song,
right?
yeah,
right?
yeah. I'm going to let Chris answer that one.
So how did we choose our theme song? Great question. So before we could even hit record on our first episode of Chalk and Gavel, there was a lot of stuff that we didn't think about, right? That was part of the kind of the learning process of Chalk and Gavel. One of the things we didn't think about was music. We knew we wanted to make Chalk and Gavel have a certain level of production that was more than just kind of hitting record and just having our two voices. We wanted to make it engaging, interesting, add, those little flourishes that make podcasts memorable. And one of those is having a good intro and outro song. Another one is having a good logo. So we had my sister, who's a graphic designer, do this one. I love our logo because it sets the tone a little bit, where it's educational but still legal. It's got those sharp lines. You've got the gavel. It's got chalk and gavel coming off of it. And so part of this conversation was just kind of like what tone we want the show to have. And so we were looking for a song that had a lot of energy, that kind of spoke to education in some way, or spoke to the kind of the content that we wanted. And most importantly, it had to be royalty-free music, meaning that we could use it in our show. Either we could get the license or it was Creative Commons, because it turns out all this music has protections, copyright protections, and you can't use it for stuff like this unless you've got a license. And it would be a bad look for our law podcast if we started off by violating, these intellectual property rights. So we went through a bunch of royalty-free music sites. There's a bunch of them out there. We landed on premiumbeats.com. There's a song that we chose. Our theme song for Chalk and Gavel is "Kids Are All Right" by Grace Mesa. The thing that jumped out to me about the song is it's really upbeat. It's engaging. It's got a fantastic energy to it that kind of sets the tone of the show, moving it forward. And then it's also about kids, and the kids are all right. And one of the things, we're talking about education law. And for us, the most important thing about education are the students and the kids. And so, this idea that the kids are all right is really kind of central to it. So it just felt like, a really fun song with a kind of good hook that we could really build the show around.
Excellent. Excellent. All right. So this is the last question in this bucket, and I think it's a really interesting one. I'm curious about this one myself. Ella Cordon asked, do listeners ever reach out to debate you about a specific case, and have you ever been proven wrong?
Oh, that is a fantastic question, and it's kind of interesting. So we're getting, first of all, we're getting a ton of AI-generated emails now. I couldn't believe this, but it makes perfect sense that this happens. There's a lot of public relations people out there who have clients who, they offer this educational service and this consulting thing. And the number of AI-generated emails that we get saying, hi, Jamie and Chris, my name is so-and-so, and I think my client would be an incredible guest for your podcast. The episode that you just did on insert title of Chalk and Gavel episode here really resonated with, it is absolutely, it's kind of infuriating because it's just so obvious that they have not listened to anything. They don't know anything about what the show's about, because if they did listen, they would know that our format does not lend itself to anything like that. And we really try to avoid, promoting products and things like that. We're here to tell these law stories, right? So that's some of the that's a lot of the communication we get. But interestingly, and I'm not gonna go into a lot of detail just to protect the people who are involved, because this may or may not be an ongoing situation. But one of the episodes that we recorded a while ago, I would say maybe a month or two after the episode came out, we get an email or a direct message on our Facebook account or whatever, and it was a perfectly nice message, but it was from the mother of one of the kids in a case that we had talked about, and she was providing additional context that she said, one of the things that you guys didn't talk about in this particular episode was this, that, and the other thing. And she said, I understand why, because it wasn't in the opinion, but there's, and it was just a really, that email hit us hard. This wasn't a huge national case by any means or whatever, but it was a pretty interesting one. And it wasn't like this case was getting tons of press or anything. But, I'm not sure how she found it. Maybe, she had some sort of Google search thing going, that if any time something about that case was mentioned, she was notified. And then when the episode came out, the internet god algorithm thing spit that out to her. Wow. But that was and we ended up communicating a little bit back and forth. And that was really, really fascinating. But nobody has ever told us that we were wrong about something yet, which either tells us we're doing an okay job or really nobody's listening. I'm hoping it's the former.
Yeah, you're doing a great job.
Yeah, anyway, so that's that.
Yeah, but mom contacting you, it just emphasizes that, we sometimes look at these cases out of context, and I love in the show that you spend so much time on the facts, but these are years of people's lives, right. And these are emotionally charged issues, right. And really serious, and so it is really important to have the personal side, the story that's involved in the lawsuits, and understand that it involves way more people than just the litigants and the defendants, right? Like there's so many people affected by litigation and all it can be emotionally draining. And so I'm glad that she reached out to you.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it is interesting, which Chris and I always try to talk about that on the show, is we try to talk about what we know as fact from the opinion, but then we also try to, we say we're speculating when we're speculating, but we try to at least inform the audience of exactly what you're talking about, that there is a lot more to this that we don't know, that, you know, people have been dealing with this particular issue. You know, they deal with it at the school level, they'll deal with something for months or possibly even years before it even gets into the courts. Mm-hmm. And the amount of stuff that happens through that process, you know, it's probably fair to say that, you know, 80% of that, 90% of that doesn't end up in the opinion, but plays a critical role in how that case and how that fact pattern shakes out. And so we try to at least give the listeners some idea that there is a lot more to these stories, right? Anyway, so let's dive into some of the more practical school law questions that our listeners asked, and the first one is a really good one. As we all know, most teachers don't get any training in anything related to school law. Most administrators may only get one course. We have another question from Reagan, and she asked, how can educators stay up to date with ever-changing policies while teaching full-time? And that is a great question, Reagan. Janet, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's really tricky for me to stay up to date. And so busy working professionals, that is a tricky one. It's hard. But the good news is I've found that there's some excellent resources and they're ideal for busy educators. So I'll share a few that I was thinking about. Number one, and I'm being honest about this, I promise, it's your podcast. Like I said, it's a convenient way. I can listen to it on my commute. I can listen to it on double speed when you sound like a chipmunk. No, but it's honestly my number one way to keep up to date. You're very current with the content that you cover. I love the bell ringers that provide the current events. And then the second is, I think for all of us out there, it's important to ensure that you go ahead and train your social media feeds to pick up on education law content. Yeah. So there's so many current events that I find out because they just pop up on my feed. Well, we have these annoying algorithms, we might as well use them to our advantage, right? The number three way, there's some print sources. So for us codgers who still read, but I really like two print sources. There's actually this really new source that ELA is providing. It's a new magazine. It's called Law and Policy in Schools, and it's specifically geared for teachers and school leaders. So here we are at the conference. We get to see all these amazing people from across the world, really, but also across the country. But we know that teachers and many school leaders can't get off time to come to the conference. Right. So this publication is really geared for teachers and school leaders. They get to learn about school law experts in really short articles, engaging articles. It's vetted, so we know that it's accurate information. The next print source is Education Week. Raise your hand if you subscribe to Education Week, right? Like a lot of us see that as like the premier source for news related to education. And of course, they feature a lot of education law and policy current issues. And then finally, I think there should be in-service training about education law. We know our teachers aren't getting pre-service training. Plus, with in-service training, teachers can really know about the hot topics that are happening in their jurisdiction, their community, their school building. And so if those of you who are interested in having more training in law, you're not getting it, I think you should ask for it. I think you should advocate for it. Oftentimes we know that school attorneys will provide that type of training, but they provide that type of training to the leaders of the district. And I really feel strongly that districts should invite teachers and other school employees to attend that type of professional development. So after all, these are the people who are on the front lines. So yes, leaders absolutely need to know about the law, but definitely all school employees need to be aware to know how to make split-second decisions and know how to prevent legal violations. So if teachers ask for this type of legal training and they're told, we just have too much to do, we can't provide it. I've had former students, current students who create their own professional learning communities. They use resources that are available. You could meet up monthly and have a happy hour or something to discuss some of these topics. There's just so much guidance available There's so much online if you just are proactive and look for it. So like the U.S. Department of Education has, and there's lots of different organizations that have frequently asked questions specific to special education law. There's just so much out there that if you want to find accurate legal information and help you increase your legal literacy, I really think you can stay up to date.
Yeah. Yeah, and some of those resources that Janet mentioned, Ed Week and Law and Policy in Schools and a handful of those other resources, we will put links to those in the show notes so you can go there and access those materials as well. So let's go ahead and move to the next question here.
All right, so we have another one of my superstar students. Ella Money asked, how can educators advocate for students' rights without losing their jobs?
Well, thanks, Ella, for that heavy question. Yeah, it's such a huge issue right now. I mean, I have this discussion in the courses that I teach a lot as well with current teachers who are prospective school administrators. I have it in my doctoral level courses with current administrators who are looking to become superintendents. I mean, we're in a very interesting time right now, and I think that's hard. And when my students ask me about this question, I mean, I fall back to a lot of the things that probably most of us in this room fall back to when we're teaching it, Garcetti, and trying to help educators understand that what they have the ability to speak out on, and when they should kind of rein it in. And we see this a little bit more with some of the younger folks, and I'm not trying to overgeneralize here, but folks who have kind of grown up with social media and that almost that feeling of anonymity, right? And I'm going to say things online that I might not normally say in person, and that's the kind of stuff that often trips people up. But even us older folk have issues with that too, because this stuff has been around long enough that we've all gotten pretty used to it.
Yeah, and there's a lot of emotional issues. So a lot of times people will post something just because they want to vent, it's kind of like their diary. Right. And once it's out there, or once they send that email, that's problematic.
Yeah, and so we have this, Chris has this saying on the show that we try to employ all the time, and now we actually have merchandise on our website that has this phrase. Merch, yeah, I know.
Official.
It's like everybody's got a podcast. Everybody's got merch. So, but Chris likes to say, dance like no one's watching, but email like it's going to be read in court. So that, but it's not a bad thing to kind of have in the back of your mind. You can advocate for students' rights, but you have to be careful, because you can get in trouble. You do have some responsibilities as an educator, as somebody who is sort of, I don't want to say contractually bound, but like it's part of your responsibility to be a good role model, to set a good example, to
You're being scrutinized, and you have to be aware of that.
Exactly.
For better or for worse.
Right, and so, but it's tough.
Yeah.
It's tough.
I want to turn it to positive, though.
Okay.
That's very accurate. I completely agree with you. But I also think that when educators know about the law and they want to advocate for their students' rights, that gives them an arsenal. That if they know the nuances of the law. So for instance, the whole reason I went to law school was because I cared about advocating for students with disabilities. But as a teacher, I didn't understand all the complicated nuances of case law, and different jurisdictions had different rules. And so, what I hear my students say is like, oh gosh, I really went into this profession because I really care about English learners, or I really care about, you name it, this issue. And when they know the legal parameters, then they can go to people and be like, hey, we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing under the law, or hey, can we get more resources from the district because here's our legal responsibilities. So sometimes you can use the law to your advantage to advocate for students, and that's perfectly legal to do as long as you do it professionally and you're not criticizing your supervisors and blasting them on social media or something. But
knowing more about the law is simply empowering.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Okay, so the next question, Reagan Price, it's a different Reagan. There's a lot of Reagans, I guess.
Lots of Reagans, lots of Sams, lots of Abbeys, yeah.
So Reagan Price asks the question, what do you think are the biggest legal misunderstandings among teachers? So I'm going to turn this one over to Chris.
I think the one or two that I want to highlight, So I think the first misunderstanding amongst pretty much everyone really is that the law is black and white. I think that catches a lot of us off guard. We often treat the law as this static thing that is already kind of like predetermined, right? And that is so far from what the law is and how it actually like works. Because the law is always ambiguous. It's always shades of gray. There's always room for interpretation. And it's always kind of shifting depending on how it's interpreted, how it's enforced, all of these different things. So like treating the law as this black and white thing, like it requires us to do X in X way, or it forbids us from doing Y, I think that's an oversimplification in a lot of situations. When I'm teaching this, I always talk about the thought experiment, no vehicles in the park. And I start students off with that in my classes because what does that mean is open to interpretation. Like, what do we mean when we talk about vehicles? Is a stroller a vehicle? What about a wheelchair? What about an electric scooter? All of those are, test cases for what we mean by vehicle in the park. And so, there's people who are interpreting this and people who are implementing it. And I always think about the law as the process by which these external authorities get interpreted, implemented, and enforced. So it's very much like this conversation between the people who make the rules, the people who interpret the rules, and the people who actually implement the rules. And that's kind of the other big misunderstanding that I want to kind of address, which is this idea that like teachers or kind of the people implementing the rules aren't making policy or aren't making the law because it's very much a dialogue, a conversation. It's a dialogue between all of these different groups because you never know what the rules are until you know the rules about following the rules. And so how teachers kind of implement this stuff in practice really kind of defines what the rules are. And so when you look at it this way, the law is open to interpretation. It allows a lot of room for discretion about what we do and how we do it. And it kind of recognizes that teachers have a pretty important role in the law as the folks who put it into practice. And so when viewed through that lens, I think that can be a really empowering way to think about the law. It changes educators and school leaders from kind of these passive policy compliers to these active kind of agents creating law and policy in practice. And I think that is a much more accurate way to think about the law, as well as just, a more empowering one.
Okay, thank you, Chris.
Yeah, and I love what he said about teachers' agency. So in class, we a lot of times will talk about the ethics and how a lot of times the law is absent, it's unclear, it's unjust. And so in those situations, teachers and others in schools, they have this agency to not do what they must do, but maybe do what they should do. And there's lots of ethical dilemmas out there. And, we brought up the one about social media.
Right.
And that's tricky because we do have legal guidance from the Supreme Court, but it's complicated. So not only should teachers and educators know about the nuances of that guidance, but it's also just important for them to have an ethical compass and be thinking about, is this the right thing to do? What will be the consequences if I do this? What are the long-term consequences? But just to go into some of the legal rules when it comes to teachers' social media, and we don't have time for a long lecture on it, and I'm sure listeners don't want me to provide a long lecture on it. But here's the basics. So courts balance public employees' free speech rights with employers' interests in maintaining an efficient workplace. So there's this balancing test that goes on. And generally, courts have decided that teachers' free speech rights are limited. However, some of their free speech is protected by the First Amendment's free speech clause. So when employees speak in their roles as private citizens and they comment, and these include comments on social media, they comment on matters of public concern, their speech is typically protected. However, when employee speech is pursuant to their official job duties, so somehow connected to their roles as teachers, or, like I said, don't put your supervisors on blast if they're complaining, having individual workplace complaints, then courts have determined that this type of expression is not protected. So some vital questions that teachers should ask, when they're thinking about what they should or should not post or, say in public. They should be thinking about what is it, what's the content of what they're going to say, where are they saying it, how are they saying it. That content, context, and the form of their speech really matters. So if teachers are disparaging students, if they're talking negatively about their colleagues or their supervisors on TikTok, that's probably not okay. So don't do that. And I see a lot of that. So don't do that. And also, if what they're saying is negatively affecting the school or their teaching reputation, that's probably also not okay. So that's kind of a general idea. There's a lot more to the legal rules surrounding teacher speech, but that gives us some good guideposts.
Good. Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Well, let's move on to another question.
Okay.
So another listener asked, what would happen if a student asked to be excused from a lesson on evolution because it conflicts with their religious beliefs? Does the teacher have to let the student leave the classroom and not test the student about evolution, even though it's part of the state standards?
Okay, that's a good one. Timely. Generally we have this responsibility when it comes to opting out to, provide alternative lessons and supervisions and things like that to ensure that students are still able to maintain state standards and things. Then we had this case come along recently, the Mahmoud versus Taylor case. We covered that on the show. We did a few episodes on it over the summer. And we're getting into a little bit of some more murky waters in light of the Mahmoud decision. It didn't provide firm lines in the sand or whatever, but it gives us some more to think about. And I think that, one of the things that we typically advise folks in light of Mahmoud is first of all, make sure that you're still following board policies, that you're still, working hard to ensure that the students meet the standards, and maybe try to avoid really quick knee-jerk reactions to say, well, this isn't part of the sex ed curriculum, so no, you can't opt out, get out of my office. It's probably not the best response at this point in light of the Mahmoud case. But this is one of those cases where, the ruling was pretty narrow, and
it's for elementary students.
There's elementary students, and so evolution might not necessarily be covered. It doesn't necessarily mean that Mahmoud wouldn't be extended to that at some point. We're just going to have to kind of wait and see how this plays out in practice, and then what else kind of ends up working its way through the court systems, and then how future courts interpret Mahmoud. Yeah, I think this goes back to yet another answer to a question that a student asks that is going to be disappointing to that student, because the answer is, well, it all depends. Mm-hmm. They love hearing that.
Oh yeah.
I don't know. Any other thoughts on that, or?
I don't. I think you've covered it well.
Okay. Thank you. And we're about to move into the last part of the show, but before we do that, there is one more really good question that a student asked, and that question was, with AI in classrooms, what new legal, ethical concerns should schools prepare for? And so since Chris has done a lot of work on AI in schools, I'm going to let Chris talk about this one.
Oh man, AI. There's so much that we could talk about here with the use of AI in schools by students, by teachers, by school leaders, whoever it might be. But, I think the thing I want to highlight the most about AI and schools and kind of the legal, ethical concerns is that schools have dealt with new technology for forever, right? And we've always kind of figured out a way, and primarily we've done so by applying existing frameworks to new technological problems. And I think for AI, that goes a long way. The users of AI are always going to be kind of primarily responsible for how they use AI. And if you accept that proposition, then the outputs of AI become the individual's responsibility. So if the AI is perpetuating bias or is engaging in intellectual property theft or something like that, then it's the user's fault, right? As long as, assuming that the user doesn't do their due diligence and doesn't check everything, which is why when it comes to AI use, I always say trust but verify, right? So if you're going to use it, then make sure it's not hallucinating, or make sure that it's being accurate or unbiased or whatever it might be. And so with that in mind, there's a lot of kind of nitty gritty stuff that we should probably be thinking about when it comes to AI use, student privacy, what we put into these machines, what they do with that once they get it, what they do with kind of user data. So, making sure we're not using student information or personally identifiable information in these things. And then, obviously there's the concerns about academic dishonesty and things like that. So what does that look like? The way I approach it is I kind of treat it like everything else when it comes to academic dishonesty. Is it your work? Is it your intellectual labor? If not, then, hey, maybe that's a problem. I think the big ones are going to be the things that come up about overuse of AI in interesting ways. So I think a big one is bullying and harassment with things like deep fakes. That's something that feels new in a way that, probably wasn't available in the same way before AI. So that's something that I think schools are going to have to really grapple with. And, I think the existing bullying and harassment policies are pretty good at dealing with something like that, but, they're going to have to be expanded potentially depending on what happens, especially if you've got these AI agents that are kind of doing their own thing, but have been kind of wound up and set off by other users. So fake social media accounts, things like that. And just the general ethical concerns that I have about AI use, about replacing human decision-making and relationships and things like that. So, AI tutors, how do you integrate that in a way that doesn't create these kind of interesting parasocial relationships between users and the AI, particularly for young kids? That becomes a really tricky terrain. So like I said, there's so much stuff that we could talk about when it comes to AI. Chalk and Gavel, we did do an episode on AI. The student who used AI for his history paper and got in trouble for it and tried to argue that, hey, I didn't copy anybody's work because AI isn't actually an author. That argument didn't get him very far, but he tried. So, we're going to keep covering these things, but it's a really interesting and fastly developing area of education law.
Yeah, there were so many presentations at the conference about AI.
Yeah.
It's absolutely one of those things to stay on top of. So we have our last bucket of questions. These are ones we're looking forward to, the silly questions. So are we ready? Y'all ready for this? All right, good. All right, so what's your favorite Supreme Court case and what is the most influential?
Okay, well, I know because I've had this conversation with Chris before. I know what his favorite Supreme Court case is, and it's West Virginia versus Barnett. I'm not gonna. I don't think I'm gonna explain why, because I don't know if I would do that explanation justice on his behalf. But that is Chris's favorite Supreme Court case. Me personally, I don't know if I have one. I like all of the student speech ones. I like that package of student speech cases. I like the Tinker, Bethel, Morse, Hazelwood, and Brandy Levy, like that whole package.
Favorite night to teach. I love that night.
I know, that's it's so much fun. So I love revealing to the students how that whole progression sort of unfolds, kind of chronologically, I guess. And so those are my favorite. As far as most influential, I struggle. I don't know. I like Tinker. I come back to Tinker just because of how often it's still, it's 50, 60 years at this point, and it's still everywhere.
Yeah.
And I don't know. And we also interviewed Mary Beth Tinker, so I'm kind of partial to that.
Yeah, that changed her life.
Right.
Just like some of the other students and some of the student speech cases, they became advocates for free speech.
Right.
So
Totally.
these really make a difference. So
What's yours?
Well, I'm going to have to say that only because I can guarantee every semester when I do bong hits for Jesus, that's going to perk
Everybody's
up.
awake.
Everybody's
Yeah.
awake. Everybody's awake, because I usually teach at night. I'm conflicting with sports
And
and
how
all
many
these other.
times do you hear a professor just say bong hits for Jesus?
I know. Plus, I have like this 14-foot banner that replicates the actual banner.
Nice.
Yeah, so I pull that out every semester. We do a skit. I have a little fake Olympic torch that gets run through the classroom, and I have students ask, can I have that banner? I want to hang it up in my apartment. I'm like, no, that's a very precious banner. I think it's been around for at least 5 years. So that's my favorite, as far as it's always fun, and we can do a lot of fun things with student speech. But when it comes to influential, of course, Brown versus Board of Education.
Right.
That's why this organization, Education Law Association, even exists. Exchange Society. But at the same time, it's complicated, right? So Brown, we're racially segregated in schools today. And so the Brown decision just shows the limits of the law and the limits of implementation of the law, and how important societal influences are, and how important what teachers do, in classrooms is, and what kind of advocacy that's so important. But I'm going to end on a positive. So Brown just led to so many important consequences, so many greater legal protections and access for education for so many students, and that includes students with disabilities, which is something that I'm really passionate about.
Yeah, great. Let's see.
I know. I have a question.
Oh, yeah.
So what's the most lawyerly thing that you've ever said in real life?
Well, so I'm not a lawyer. I am a former principal, and somebody who has just become very interested in all this stuff. So I haven't had a long history of being able to say lawyerly things. I mean, I say it depends a lot now.
Yep.
That is definitely something. And I often say to my students when they ask, I am not a lawyer, and this is not legal advice. Mm-hmm. And so that's probably one of the most lawyerly things I say.
Yeah.
Which is saying I'm not a lawyer.
Very good. Well, that's important. As a lawyer, that's an important thing for you to say. When they come to me asking for legal advice when maybe they've gotten to some hot water, I love being able to say, I can't do that.
Don't talk
to
me.
somebody else. Yeah. All right, another one. What's your go-to karaoke song? One of my students wanted to know that.
That's a great question to end on. My go-to karaoke song, Janet and I were talking about this last night. I have actually never done karaoke in my entire life.
And with a radio voice like this, he needs to do karaoke.
And I was a musician. Like, I spent many years, I was touring in a smelly, tour bus, and I've played and sang many, many times, but never karaoke. So I will kind of translate that to what are some of the favorite things I like to sing. Anything as a keyboard player, anything Elton John or Billy Joel is a great go-to for me. And then I am also partial to playing and singing Easy Like Sunday Morning by the Commodores.
Oh, I love
That's
that
one of my favorite
song.
songs.
Oh, that's such a good one.
This is yet another opportunity in the show for the listeners to understand how old I am. Although most of that Elton John, Billy Joel, Commodore stuff was actually before my time. So
yeah. My 14-year-old's going to a concert tonight, 70s music. So
nice.
Yeah, it's making a comeback.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. What about yours? What's your favorite?
Oh gosh, I wasn't ready for this. I'd have to say I love a one-hit wonder, Come On Eileen. That's my pump-up song. I love that song.
That's a good one.
And that
80s.
shows, 80s. I'm all 80s. Yeah. But I do love the Elton John, Billy Joel. I love the recent documentary about Billy Joel.
That was a great, yes, that was a great
Yeah.
one. Yeah, it was really, really good. I miss the 80s.
I don't miss the fashion.
The
But
shoulder
yeah, the
pads.
music is great.
All right, well, that's we're gonna right on time wrap things up.
This is fun.
Yeah, no, Janet, I just want to say thank you very much for stepping in and helping me do this in Chris's absence.
Thank you, like ABBA would say, for taking a chance on me.
Oh, wow, that was. Okay, so that does it for another episode, a little bit of a different episode of Chalk and Gavel, and we thank you for listening, and we'll see you again back here in 2 weeks. Thank you, everybody. Okay.